1 year after the massive success of Frankenstein, Boris Karloff was back in the lead role of another iconic Universal horror film, 1932's The Mummy. Other familiar faces returned too, both in front of and behind the camera. The legendary Jack Pierce attempted to outdo himself with a makeup job that was among the most extensive of his career. The Mummy also spawned a franchise that spanned into different eras, but it all started with an idea that originally wasn't a mummy movie at all. There were also deleted scenes that indicate it would have been an even more epic experience for audiences. So help me pop open this sarcophagus and unwrap this decades-old favorite. In 1921, at a British museum in Cairo, Egypt, a team of field expeditionists analyze artifacts recently unearthed. The team is led by the patient Sir Joseph Whemple. His protege, Ralph Norton, and colleague, Dr. Muller, are fascinated by the unique find. A mummy who they surmise was buried alive is looked over by the doctor. Its sarcophagus is marked with the name Imhotep, high priest of the Temple of the Sun at Karnak. The sacred spells that protect the soul on its journey to the underworld are also chipped off the coffin. Imhotep was buried with a small box that's inscribed with a warning.
Death, eternal punishment, for anyone who opens this casket.
Muller is adamantly against opening the cursed box, but the young Norton is excited to uncover its contents. As Whemple talks with his friend outside, Ralph is overcome with curiosity and unveils a scroll. As he reads from it, the mummy is brought to life and takes the ancient writing, leaving Norton a cackling, mad mess. Over a decade later, Sir Joseph's son Frank now works at the museum with Professor Pearson. They've had a scarce season, barely finding anything of value. A stoic Egyptian named Ardith Bey arrives to point them in the direction of a site containing the remains of Princess Anksanama. Pearson and Frank are successful in excavating her tomb, and a new exhibit is created at the Cairo Museum featuring the artifacts. It soon becomes clear that Bey has an ulterior motive for digging up the long-dead princess. But how does a friend of Dr. Muller's named Helen Grosvenor tie into his plan? Inspired by the constant media coverage of the supposedly cursed excavation of King Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt, Carl Laemmle Jr. assigned Universal story editor Richard Schayer with penning a story that could capitalize off the news. Writer Nina Wilcox Putnam was brought in, and together they turned in a 9-page story called Cagliostro, a fictionalized take on the self-proclaimed psychic magician who became a fixture of France's upper class in the 1700s. In Putnam and Schayer's idea, Cagliostro was an ancient Egyptian priest who kept himself alive for 4,000 years with the help of injected nitrates. Many of the elements in this original story were adopted by what the mummy became, but changed around, such as Cagliostro monitoring his enemies with a TV surveillance system and killing them from afar with a death ray. Likewise, Imhotep uses his ancient powers to spy on and murder his rivals from the safety of his residence. All the scientific explanations of the antagonist's tactics and survival into the modern age were replaced by mystical Egyptian magic. Cagliostro was announced with Karloff starring as the lead. The changes started when playwright John L. Balderston was brought in to write the full script. As a journalist, he covered King Tut's finding in 1922 and seemed well suited to fleshing out a story that evoked that theme and setting. What the writer came up with was a reworking of Cagliostro that bore more of a resemblance to his Dracula play. In fact, some of the early titles he or the production company suggested were Undead or King of the Dead. Imhotep also originally spent his nights inside his sarcophagus. After seeing Dracula so recently, it's very easy to spot the strong similarities. Sometimes it feels a little too close to the Count's Universal movie. Even if we remove the involvement of Dracula stars Edward Van Sloan and David Manners portraying the same basic roles, even if we look past Dracula's cinematographer Karl Freund sitting in the director's chair here, the basic story structure is largely intact. Those iconic shots of Karloff's eyes lighting up easily bring to mind the Bela Lugosi angles from the previous year. When Imhotep raises his hand to exert control over those trying to stop him, all I could think of was the Count lifting his arm to implement his hypnotic powers. This one might be a coincidence, but the mummy is introduced with Swan Lake under the title card. Some of the film historians who were interviewed or had commentary tracks on the home releases go as far to say The Mummy is a remake of Dracula. It's hard to argue their point. The Arthur Conan Doyle short story The Ring of Thoth was also pointed out as having very similar features. While he had a relationship with Universal for partially writing the stage productions they adapted into Dracula and Frankenstein, Balderston had never actually written a screenplay before. Knowing that, one might find it strange that he had very detailed camera movements listed in his script. The film follows those directions precisely, which wouldn't leave much room for first-time feature director but career cinematographer Karl Freund to interpret the material. Well, there might be an explanation for this. Freund was hired about a month before Balderston's final script was completed. In his commentary track, film historian Paul M. Jensen theorizes the director had to have had some involvement on the final draft. It's unlikely Balderston was familiar with that type of technical detail, and Freund had the credits and talent to do what he wanted with the film's visuals. While it's not confirmed, it seems probable the director lent a hand in the scripting department. Freund broke from the status quo in several other ways. First, by working with Universal to establish a new system where, as the director, he could call the writer to set for revisions. He was a pioneer of new techniques, too. The Mummy features an early use of rear projection in the scene with Frank and Dr. Muller in the back of a car. The flashback scene showing how Imhotep cheated death looked to be shot in a frame rate closer to silent films, which were around 18 frames per second instead of the now standard 24. This look gifted those scenes an older feel when compared to the rest of the movie. With 20 minutes of it, The Mummy was the first of Universal's classic horror pictures to have a full musical score. Freund chose composer James Diedrich for the job, but wasn't happy with some of what he heard. So, he went and got replacement stock cues from Universal's library by a different composer named Heinz Rohmheld. Rohmheld would go on to provide the music for The Invisible Man, The Black Cat, and more. One aspect Freund didn't have a strong influence over was Zita Johann, the actress who played Helen Grosvenor. They often clashed on set. As a stage performer, Johann reportedly thought she was better than Hollywood, but couldn't turn down the money. Freund would treat her poorly, not giving her a chair on set, and finishing principal photography with Zita walking into a lion's den with real lions for a deleted scene. Johann also passed out at one point. Needless to say, there was no love lost between director and leading lady. One person Zita was fond of was Boris Karloff. This was a different role for larger audiences to see him in after Frankenstein's monster. For one thing, he speaks.
Permit me to present you with the most sensational find since that of Tutankhamun.
Don't cross this line!
Imhotep is more of an obsessed romantic than pure evil, but that obsession has turned him into a monster. Karloff does well portraying the layers of this character's complexity, both in the flashbacks and as the enigmatic and love-struck Ardith Bey in the contemporary scenes. The greatest challenge the actor faced in his new part was once again Jack Pierce's imagination. By all accounts, Karloff was only in full makeup as the Mummy for one day, but it took even longer than Frankenstein's creature to apply and remove. The claim from Boris was 8 hours. The materials were again simple, yet effective. Spirit gum, cotton batting, collodion, clay, and of course the mummy's wrapping. The wrapping was baked and painted to give it an aged look. All these substances were applied in layers to create the wrinkles. The resulting images were some of the most memorable Pierce ever contributed to. Imhotep first opening his eyes and moving his arms is a famous shot in early horror. Too bad Jack didn't leave his friend any space in the costume to relieve himself. That was apparently a problem on set since Boris was covered from head to toe in wrappings. There are a few promotional shots with Imhotep in full body makeup and costume, but it's never seen on screen. Considering how great that opener was, I think they made the right choice in keeping our view obscured. Wearing and removing the makeup was excruciatingly painful. Even in the scenes as Ardith Bey, Karloff had to wear a version of the wrinkled mummy appearance. To add detail, Pierce painted his eyebrows and wardrobe placed him in lifts to make the character more imposing. Personally, I love how Imhotep sometimes leaves behind dusty residue from his decomposed body. Just a great extra component that gives a sense of tangibility to the villain. At the Cairo Museum, Ardith Bey, aka Imhotep, reads from the Scroll of Thoth, which awakens the reincarnated spirit of Ankhsenamen inside Helen. Thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, Imhotep and the princess were forbidden lovers. When Ankhsenamen died, Imhotep broke sacred law to steal the Scroll of Thoth. He performed the spell that would bring him back to life after death, in hopes of retrieving his reincarnated princess in another lifetime. However, he's caught performing this sacrilegious ceremony and is condemned to death by being mummified alive. The scroll was buried with him so no other would try the same. Acting as Ardith Bey in modern day, Imhotep has the power to put others in trances, spy on his enemies, and kill from afar. When Dr. Muller and Sir Joseph discover Bey's true identity, the elder Whemple attempts to burn the scroll, but Imhotep induces a heart attack, murdering him. As Bey pursues Helen, Frank also falls in love with her, creating a tug-of-war between Helen's past life and her current one. Finally, Imhotep succeeds in abducting the woman and restores her memories of Ankhsenamen. But to truly be together for all time, he must burn her original body, kill Helen, mummify her, and resurrect her as a living corpse, just as he's become. After resisting, the princess is put under Imhotep's influence and is nearly killed before Frank and Muller arrive. They cause a long enough distraction for Ankhsenamen to snap out of it. She quickly repents for breaking her vow as a Vestal virgin and prays to the goddess Isis to deliver her. Imhotep then crumbles to dust as the Scroll of Thoth burns and Helen is reunited with Frank. Upon its release on December 22, 1932, The Mummy received a lukewarm reception from critics and audiences. It didn't make an overwhelming amount of money for the studio, but was a moderate success. The film saw bigger box office returns overseas versus domestically. Theatergoers reacted to some of the scares, and the art direction stood out. It has since become a much more respected picture in the eyes of fans. At one point, we were all very close to seeing substantially more from The Mummy. There were 13 pages cut out that were shot. These scenes mostly centered on seeing Ankhsenamen living her different lives in other time periods. At one point near the end, Imhotep holds a bronze mirror to Helen that reflects back Ankhsenamen's deaths in ancient Rome, the Middle Ages, and much more. These short glimpses featured Crusaders, Vikings, it all sounds great, and some stills of these scenes survived. A lot of the flashback stuff we did see was originally ordered differently too. We had to wait longer to see Imhotep's full backstory, for example. Most of these changes were made at the behest of producer Carl Laemmle Jr., who had them cut to keep up the pace. I think this material could have added an extra dimension that would have improved the overall film if implemented the right way. Unlike other Universal horror classics, The Mummy never received a proper sequel, but the franchise lived on in various forms. In 1940's The Mummy's Hand, footage from Imhotep's flashback is repurposed for the character of Karis. There would be 4 more Mummy films that stretched into the following decade. In 1999, Universal completely rebooted the property with the Brendan Fraser movies. That's where a lot of my memories of this franchise lie. Those films were more Raiders of the Lost Ark than vintage horror, but I look back at those first 2 entries of that trilogy fondly. Mostly. The Scorpion King movies and the Mummy animated series also spun off from this version. We can't talk about The Mummy without at least mentioning the 2017 Tom Cruise film. As of the writing of this video, I haven't seen it, but reactions haven't given me much reason to. It was the start of Universal's planned Dark Universe series, but infamously bombed so hard that it tanked the entire franchise before it could even get off the ground. Still, I don't think that failure diminishes in any way the lasting impact of the 1932 film or even the Brendan Fraser trilogy. The Mummy is the first time we see that famous plane logo since we started Universal, so that was a fun way to get things started. That, combined with one of my favorite title reveals and how incredible that introduction scene was, had me thinking I'd like this movie better than the first time I watched it. But as the film went on, it reinforced my opinion that The Mummy is just okay. There are excellent things about it. Jack Pierce's makeup and Boris Karloff's performance hold up exceedingly well. Karl Freund and Charles J. Stumar's camera work created some memorable shots that stuck with me. Imhotep's eyes, that movement leading to the flashback in the pool, Imhotep's death scene with the dissolve effect, and that whole introduction really do look great. It was also nice to hear them start to implement some music. The acting from most of the cast felt subdued outside of Karloff and Bramwell Fletcher in the opener. Considering the energy he brought and the trauma his character endured, I wish Ralph Norton showed up after the time jump.
Maybe he got too gay with the Vestal Virgins in the temple.
Having him die off screen felt like a cop-out too. He could have been this movie's Renfield. The Frank character falls in love with Helen almost immediately, making for a very forced love triangle.
Don't you think I've had enough excitement for one evening without the additional thrill of a strange man making love to me?
Helen, I love you.
It'd be more forgivable if Zita Johann and David Manners had better chemistry, but they just seem like an afterthought here. The ending is also way too abrupt. Seems to be a mark of the time period, I guess. Even compared to this film's peers, the pacing is very slow, with an essential spark missing. Maybe those flashback scenes with Unks and Allman would have given the plot an extra push. On the other hand, maybe Junior was right, and they would have slowed things down even more. I do know they probably would have helped me follow the story a bit better. I've seen this multiple times, and when I'm in the middle of it, I always feel like I'm missing something about the backstory for some reason. In all, The Mummy deserves the praise it gets. I just don't think it's on the same level as some of its contemporaries. Thanks to the 4K Blu-ray and all the experts on there for the information I presented earlier. Remember to check out the Walter Culture YouTube channel, and that's a wrap. Or is it? Why don't we experience a mummy adventure together? Yeah, that sounds like a hot night on the town. See you then.